Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness lead to the most unexpected discoveries. Sometimes the people we think need saving are the ones who end up saving us. Ben Harlow had been leaving food scraps for stray animals behind Murphy's general store for over a year. The weathered mountain man lived alone in Canyon's edge, and feeding the strays had become his quiet ritual. But on this morning, he found something that changed everything. Two young girls, no older than 8, were sharing his leftovers with a golden dog. The twins were barefoot, thin, and clearly homeless. They moved carefully, dividing the food with practiced hands. Ben stood frozen, watching this scene unfold in the morning light. What would you do if you discovered 2 children living on the streets, surviving on scraps meant for animals? This is the story of how an unlikely family formed in the most unexpected way. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ben Harlow's leather journal lay open on his kitchen table, its weathered pages filled with sketches of deer, hawks, and the occasional coyote that wandered down from the mesa. The entries were sparse: weather observations, animal sightings, and the rare note about supplies needed from town. It was the journal of a man who had forgotten how to talk to people, who found more comfort in the language of wind patterns and wildlife tracks than human conversation. The cabin sat 3 miles outside Canyon's edge, nestled against a red rock formation that caught the morning sun like a beacon. Ben had built most of it himself after leaving his position as a park ranger 15 years ago, using timber from fallen trees and stones gathered from the creek bed. It was simple, functional, and perfectly suited for one person who wanted nothing more than to be left alone. Canyon's edge itself barely qualified as a town anymore. What had once been a bustling mining community in the 1800s had dwindled to maybe 300 souls, most of them too stubborn or too poor to leave. Main Street stretched for 6 blocks, half the storefronts boarded up, the paint peeling from those that remained. Murphy's general store anchored one end, the Dusty Rose Saloon the other, with Doc Martinez's clinic, the post office, and Sheriff Reynolds' office scattered in between. Ben knew these people, the way you know distant relatives you see at funerals, familiar faces attached to half-remembered stories. Murphy O'Brien, whose Irish grandfather had built the general store in 1923, still worked behind the same wooden counter, his red hair now silver, but his disposition unchanged. Doc Martinez had delivered most of the babies born in Canyon's edge over the past 30 years, and buried half their parents. Sheriff Reynolds, pushing 70 himself, kept the peace in a town where the biggest crime was usually someone's cattle wandering onto the wrong property. They all knew Ben's story, though none of them spoke of it directly. How he'd been one of the youngest park rangers ever assigned to the Wilderness Preserve. How he'd married his college sweetheart, Sarah Mitchell, and how they'd built a life together in the mountains. How their daughter Emily had been born during a blizzard. Doc Martinez arriving just in time to catch her as she entered the world screaming with indignation at the cold. They knew about the accident too, though the details were spoken in whispers, if at all. A family camping trip that had gone wrong. A flash flood in a canyon that should have been safe. Ben's desperate attempts to reach them, hampered by his own injuries. The way he'd blamed himself for suggesting that particular trail. For not checking the weather more carefully. For failing in the one moment when it mattered most. After the funerals, Ben had simply disappeared. Not physically. He still lived in Canyon's edge, still came to town for supplies, but the part of him that connected with other human beings had retreated so far inside that most people forgot it had ever existed. He quit the park service, stopped attending church, declined dinner invitations until people stopped offering them. His days followed a pattern as predictable as the sunrise. Wake before dawn, coffee black and strong. Check the weather, not from any app or radio, but from the sky itself, reading the clouds and wind like pages in a familiar book. Tend to his small vegetable garden, repair whatever needed repairing, hunt when the season allowed. In the evenings, he'd walk the 2 miles to town, not for company, but for the ritual of leaving scraps behind Murphy's store. It had started innocently enough. Ben couldn't stomach wasting food, and the alley behind the general store seemed as good a place as any to leave his leftovers. Within a week, he'd noticed the scraps disappearing. Within a month, he'd identified the regulars, a one-eyed tomcat with a torn ear, a mother dog with a litter hidden somewhere in the rocks, 2 ravens who seemed to run reconnaissance before the ground feeders moved in. He began timing his visits for their benefit, arriving just as the sun touched the western rim of the canyon. The animals learned his schedule too. The tomcat would appear first, cautious but no longer afraid. The dog would wait until Ben left before approaching, her pups eventually growing bold enough to venture into the open. It was the closest thing to companionship Ben allowed. Himself, this wordless understanding with creatures who asked nothing of him but consistency. They didn't need his conversation, his comfort, or his promises. They simply needed him to show up, and that was something he could manage. The journal documented these encounters in Ben's careful handwriting. Mother dog brought 3 pups today, all healthy. Tomcat stayed while I was present, first time. These creatures had become his congregation, his family, his responsibility in a way that felt safe because it came without expectations, beyond food and survival. Murphy had mentioned the arrangement once in his roundabout way. Seemed to be doing something about the strays, he'd said, while Ben paid for his monthly supplies. Appreciate it. Used to have quite a problem with them getting into the garbage. Ben had nodded and left it at that. He wasn't ready to explain that those animals had become the highlight of his day, the only living beings who looked forward to his arrival. In their simple need, he'd found a purpose that didn't require him to risk his heart again. The morning routine never varied. Ben would wake, make his coffee, and spend an hour writing in the journal before the day's tasks began. He'd sketch whatever animal had caught his attention the previous evening, noting behavioral changes, new arrivals, or concerns about their health. It was the methodical approach of a trained naturalist, but underneath the scientific observations lay something deeper, a man learning how to care again, starting with the smallest possible stakes. His cabin reflected this careful distance from human connection. 1 plate, 1 cup, 1 set of silverware. A single bed, though he often slept in the chair by the fireplace when nightmares about rushing water and distant screams drove him from dreams. Books filled one wall, field guides, wilderness survival manuals, and a few novels that Sarah had loved, their spines uncracked since her death. The refrigerator held enough food for 1 person, plus a small reserve for the strays. Bread that was slightly stale, leftover soup, bits of meat he couldn't finish. He'd learned their preferences over months of observation. The cats preferred fish when he could manage it. The dogs were grateful for anything. The ravens had a surprising fondness for cornbread. This was Ben Harlow's world. On the morning everything changed. Ordered, solitary, predictable. A place where a man could live with his grief without inflicting it on others. Where the only relationships required nothing more than showing up with food and leaving without fanfare. It was a world built on the principle that loving something meant accepting you might lose it. And the safest way to avoid that loss was simply not to love at all. But love, Ben was about to discover, has a way of finding us even when we've convinced ourselves we're beyond its reach. And sometimes it arrives in the most unexpected forms. Barefoot, hungry, and sharing scraps with a golden dog in the dusty alley behind a general store in a town that time forgot. The morning mist clung to the canyon walls like cobwebs, and Ben's boots made soft crunching sounds on the gravel path behind Murphy's general store. He carried yesterday's leftover stew in a ceramic bowl, the same one he'd been using for months. The routine was so familiar he could have walked it blindfolded. 23 steps from the back door of the store to the corner where the dumpster created a natural windbreak. But this morning, something was different. Instead of the usual scatter of empty dishes licked clean by grateful strays, Ben found a scene that stopped him in his tracks. 2 small figures huddled against the weathered wooden fence, their thin bodies pressed close to a golden retriever mix whose tail wagged uncertainly at Ben's approach. The children, Twin girls, he realized, looked up with eyes that held too much knowledge for faces so young. The older of the two, her dark hair matted and her clothes patched with what looked like strips torn from an old blanket, instinctively moved to shield her sister. In her hands, she clutched a piece of cornbread, his cornbread from 2 nights ago, breaking it into careful portions. One piece for herself, one for her twin, and a larger portion for the dog, who waited patiently for his share. "Easy now," Ben said softly, the first words he'd spoken aloud in 3 days. "I'm not going to hurt you." The protective twin, she couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, studied his face with the wariness of someone who'd learned that adult intentions weren't always kind. Her sister, slightly smaller and clutching a faded pink blanket that had seen better decades, peeked around her twin's shoulder with curious eyes that reminded Ben painfully of Emily at that age. The golden dog, a male with a coat dulled by street life, but eyes still bright with intelligence, stepped forward as if to mediate. He'd seen Ben before, had accepted food from these very hands, and his presence seemed to vouch for the stranger's good intentions. "You're the one who leaves the food," the older girl said. "It wasn't a question," Ben nodded, setting down the bowl of stew with deliberate care. "Most nights. For them." He gestured toward the area where he usually found cats and other strays. "We help them eat it sometimes," she said, her chin tilting up with a defiance that broke Ben's heart. When there's extra. As if these children were somehow lower in the pecking order than the stray animals, grateful for whatever remained after the cats and dogs had taken their fill. Ben felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he'd built stone by stone over 15 years. "What are your names?" he asked, crouching down to their eye level. The girls exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them. The older one spoke first. "I'm Luna. This is Stella." She paused, then added with careful politeness, "Thank you for the food. We only take what they don't eat." "The hell you will," Ben said, then caught himself at their startled expressions. He'd forgotten how to modulate his voice around children, forgotten that they startled easily and trusted slowly. "I mean, there's plenty. Always is." He studied them more carefully, his ranger's eye cataloguing details he wished he didn't have to see. Their clothes were clean but patched and repatched. Their hair had been recently washed, though not recently enough. Most telling of all, they moved with the practiced efficiency of people who'd learned to make every scrap count, every moment of safety last as long as possible. "Where are your parents?" The question came out harder than he'd intended. Stella, the younger twin, buried her face in her sister's shoulder. Luna's jaw set in a way that reminded Ben of Sarah when she was trying not to cry. "Gone." "Gone where?" "Just gone." Luna's voice carried a finality that discouraged further questions, but Ben had been a park ranger for 15 years before becoming a hermit. He knew how to read the signs of trouble, and these children were broadcasting distress signals he couldn't ignore. The golden dog. He needed a name. Ben thought absently, had approached the bowl of stew, and was looking between the food and the children as if seeking permission. Luna nodded, and the dog began eating with the careful pace of an animal that had learned never to wolf down food too quickly. "You named him yet?" Ben asked. "Rusty," Stella whispered from behind her sister's shoulder. Because of the color around his ears, Ben looked more closely and saw she was right. The dog's predominantly golden coat showed russet highlights around his ears and muzzle, like autumn leaves. "Good name. How long have you known him?" 2 weeks, Luna said. "He found us at the old rail yard. Been looking out for us since." The old rail yard. Ben knew it. A collection of abandoned boxcars and rusted equipment about a mile outside town. Not exactly a place for children to be living, but it would provide shelter and relative safety from both weather and unwanted attention. And before that, Luna's defenses went up again, her thin shoulders squaring. "We get by." They were scared, Ben realized. Not just of him, but of the questions, of what might happen if they revealed too much. Children who'd learned that adults asking questions often meant trouble, that the system designed to protect them might tear them apart instead. Ben made a decision that surprised him. He stood slowly, pulled his wallet from his back pocket, and extracted a $20 bill. Murphy opens the store in about an hour. This should cover some proper breakfast. Milk, eggs, bread, whatever you need. Luna stared at the money like it might bite her. We can't. It's not charity, Ben said quickly. It's payment for taking care of Rusty here, making sure the strays get fed when I can't make it to town. It was a thin fiction, but it allowed Luna to accept the money without feeling like she was begging. Ben watched her fold the bill carefully and tuck it into a pocket that had been reinforced with dental floss and determination. We'll pay you back, she said. No need. Like I said, it's payment for services rendered. Stella had emerged from behind her sister, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Can we really buy milk? The question hit Ben like a physical blow. When had he last thought about milk as a luxury? When had he forgotten what it meant to be truly hungry, not just temporarily inconvenienced by an empty pantry? You can buy whatever you need, he said. Murphy's got most everything. Tell him Ben sent you. He'll treat you fair. Rusty had finished the stew and was now sitting alert between the children and Ben, his tail wagging slowly. The dog seemed to understand that something significant was happening, that the dynamics of their small world were shifting. Ben looked at the three of them, 2 children and a dog who'd found each other in circumstances that should have broken them but somehow hadn't. They'd created their own pack, their own family unit, surviving on scraps and looking out for each other with a loyalty that put most adult relationships to shame. I come by most evenings, he said finally, usually around sunset. Leave food for the strays. Maybe I'll see you around. Luna nodded carefully. Maybe. Ben turned to go, then paused. There's a clinic in town. Doc Martinez, good man. If anyone gets hurt or sick, you go see him. Tell him Ben sent you for that too. He walked away before they could respond, his mind racing with implications he wasn't ready to examine. Behind him, he heard Stella's excited whisper, Luna, do you think he means it? About the milk? Ben kept walking, but something had shifted in his carefully ordered world. The walls he'd built to protect himself from caring too much had developed their first crack, and through that crack, light was beginning to seep in. Back at his cabin, he sat at the kitchen table with his journal open, pen poised above blank paper. But for the first time in years, he couldn't find words to describe what he'd witnessed. How do you document the moment your heart remembers how to break? How do you catalogue the precise instant when 3 strangers, 2 children and a dog, become your responsibility whether you wanted them or not? Instead, he closed the journal and walked to his kitchen window, looking out toward town. Somewhere out there, Luna and Stella were discovering whether $20 could really buy them milk and the temporary illusion of normal childhood. Somewhere out there, a golden dog named Rusty was standing guard over the most precious cargo he'd ever been entrusted to protect. And somewhere in Ben's chest, a heart he'd thought permanently closed was learning how to beat again. 3 days passed before Ben saw them again. 3 days of him leaving extra food and finding it gone by morning. 3 days of wondering if he'd imagined the whole encounter. 3 days of telling himself it was better this way, that getting involved would only lead to complications he wasn't equipped to handle. But on Thursday evening, as he approached the familiar corner behind Murphy's store with a pot of leftover chili and a sleeve of crackers, he found them waiting. Luna sat with her back against the fence, Stella curled up beside her with the pink blanket wrapped around both their shoulders. Rusty lay across their feet like a living security system. His ears perked at Ben's approach. Evening, Ben said, setting down the chili with the same careful movements he'd use approaching a wild animal. Evening, Luna replied. Though her voice carried less suspicion than before, Ben noticed changes in the 3 days since he'd first encountered them. Their clothes were cleaner. Their faces had lost some of that hollow-eyed hunger, and Stella no longer hid completely behind her sister. The $20 had bought them more than food. It had bought them hope. How's Murphy been treating you? Ben asked. Luna's mouth curved into what might have been the ghost of a smile. He gave us extra crackers. Said they were day-old and he couldn't sell them, but they tasted fresh to us. Murphy, Ben thought with a surge of affection for the old Irishman. Leave it to him to find a way to help without making it feel like charity. He also said you used to work for the park service, Luna added, studying Ben's face. That true? Long time ago. Ben settled himself on an overturned crate, maintaining enough distance to avoid crowding them while showing he intended to stay. 15 years, give or take. What happened? Why'd you stop? The question was innocent enough, but it hit territory Ben had been avoiding for over a decade. He could deflect, change the subject, make some excuse about wanting a quieter life. Instead, he found himself considering an honest answer. Lost some people I cared about, he said finally. Decided I wasn't much good at keeping folks safe. Stella lifted her head from Luna's shoulder, her young face serious. We lost people too. Our mama and daddy. The simple statement hung in the evening air like smoke from a campfire. Ben felt that crack in his chest widen a little more. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. That's a hard thing to carry. Car accident, Luna added quietly. 6 months ago. We were supposed to go live with our aunt after, but she stopped herself, glancing at Stella as if weighing how much to reveal. But, Ben prompted gently. She wasn't nice, Stella whispered. She said we were too much trouble. That we ate too much and asked too many questions. Luna shot her sister a warning look, but the words were already out. Ben felt something cold and sharp twist in his stomach. He'd seen enough neglect cases during his ranger days to read between the lines of what the girls weren't saying. So you left, he said. We ran away, Luna corrected, her chin lifting with that familiar defiance. It's different, Ben supposed it was from their perspective. Running away implied choice, agency, the decision to seek something better rather than simply escape something worse. The rail yard's not safe for long term, he said carefully. Winter comes early up here. Gets cold. We'll figure something out, Luna said, but Ben caught the uncertainty beneath her bravado. We always do. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching Rusty demolish the chili with enthusiastic tail wagging. The dog had put on weight in just 3 days, his coat already looking healthier. You know, Ben said, keeping his voice casual. I've got a workshop behind my cabin. Old shed, really, but it's got a wood stove and decent insulation. Been meaning to clean it out, but it's a big job for one person. Luna's eyes sharpened. What kind of cleaning? Sorting through 15 years of accumulated junk. Tools that need organizing, boxes that need moving. Couple days' work, probably. He paused as if the idea had just occurred to him. Could use some help if anyone was interested in earning some money. How much money? Stella asked, sitting up straighter. Fair wages for fair work. Plus meals, of course. Can't have workers going hungry. Ben pulled a piece of wood from his pocket, a partially carved horse he'd been whittling during the long evenings. It was barely started, just rough shapes emerging from the pine. But he could see Stella's eyes widen with interest. You made that? She asked. Hobby of mine. Helps pass the time. He offered it to her. Not finished yet, but you can see where it's heading. Stella took the carving with reverent care, running her small fingers over the emerging curves of the horse's neck. It's beautiful. Could teach you if you're interested. Both of you. Good skill to have. Luna was watching this exchange with the calculating look of someone far older than her years. This workshop of yours, it happened to have running water? Well, pump right outside. Clean and cold. There's an outhouse about 20 yards back, and I've got a wash tub if anyone wanted to get properly clean. The longing that crossed both girls' faces was almost painful to witness. When had he last appreciated the simple luxury of hot water and soap, the basic human dignity of cleanliness? We'd work hard, Luna said. We're not afraid of work. I can see that. Question is, are you afraid of staying in one place for a few days? It was the real question, Ben knew. These children had survived by staying mobile, by never getting too comfortable anywhere. The idea of settling, even temporarily, would feel like a risk. The workshop, Luna said carefully, does it lock from the inside? The question broke Ben's heart. These children had learned to think like prey animals, always concerned with escape routes and defensive positions. It does. And there's a bell on a rope that runs to the main cabin. Ring it once if you need something, twice if there's trouble. Luna and Stella exchanged another of their silent conversations. entire negotiations passing between them in glances and subtle nods. Finally, Luna spoke. We could try it. For a few days. If we don't like it, we leave. No questions asked. Fair enough, Ben said, extending his hand for a shake. Partners? Luna hesitated only a moment before taking his weathered hand in her small one. Partners. As they shook on it, Ben felt something shift inside him, a rusty door creaking open after years of being sealed shut. He was taking a risk, he knew. Opening himself up to caring about these children meant opening himself up to the possibility of losing them, and he wasn't sure his heart could survive another loss like that. But looking at Luna's determined face and Stella's hopeful eyes, at Rusty's tail wagging with approval, Ben realized he'd already made his choice. These three had wandered into his carefully controlled world and reminded him of something he'd almost forgotten, that sometimes the greatest risk isn't caring too much, but caring too little. Come on then, he said, standing up and gathering the empty chili pot. Let's go see about getting you all settled. As they walked the 3 miles to his cabin under the early stars, Ben pulled out his journal and made a mental note for later. Tonight, everything changed. Took on 3 partners. Hope I'm up to the job. The workshop behind Ben's cabin hadn't seen this much activity in years. What had started as a simple cleaning project had evolved into something more significant, the creation of a proper living space. Luna and Stella worked with the focused intensity of children who'd learned that comfort was temporary and should never be taken for granted. Ben found himself impressed by their practical skills. Luna could organize tools with the efficiency of a professional carpenter, grouping similar items and creating logical storage systems. Stella had an artist's eye for arrangement, turning the mundane task of sorting boxes into something approaching interior design. Where'd you learn to work like this? Ben asked on their second day, watching Luna repair a broken drawer with nothing but wood glue and careful patience. Mama taught us, Stella said, not looking up from the crayon drawing she was creating on a piece of scrap paper. The image showed 3 figures and a dog standing in front of a small building, unmistakably their current situation rendered in bright primary colors. She was good with her hands, Luna added. Said we needed to know how to fix things ourselves, 'cause you can't always count on other people to do it for you. The wisdom of a mother trying to prepare her children for an uncertain world. Ben felt a pang of recognition. He and Sarah had had similar conversations about Emily, about the importance of self-reliance and practical skills. Smart woman. Your mother. The smartest, Stella said with fierce loyalty. She could fix anything. Cars, broken toys, hurt feelings. What was her name? Ben asked gently. Sarah, Luna said. Sarah Mitchell. Ben's hands stilled on the box he was moving. Sarah Mitchell. After all these years, after all the ways life had twisted and changed course, could it really be? Mitchell was her maiden name, Luna continued, oblivious to Ben's shock. She used to tell us stories about growing up in a place called Canyon's Edge. Said she had a friend there once. Someone who taught her about tracking animals and reading weather signs. The box slipped from Ben's numb fingers, hitting the workshop floor with a crash that made both girls jump. Rusty, who'd been napping in a patch of sunlight, lifted his head with alert concern. Sorry, Ben managed. Just lost my grip, but his mind was reeling. Sarah Mitchell. Is Sarah, his childhood friend who'd moved away when they were 16, who'd promised to write but never did, who'd become a bittersweet memory of first friendship and innocent understanding. The girl who'd taught him that silence didn't always need to be filled, that sometimes the best company was someone who could sit quietly and watch the world with the same sense of wonder. She remembered Canyon's Edge fondly, Stella was saying, holding up her drawing for Ben to see. Said it was the kind of place where people looked out for each other. Ben studied the crayon drawing with new eyes. Stella had captured something essential about their little arrangement, the sense of belonging, of found family, of people who'd needed each other finding their way together. But now he saw something else, in the careful way she'd drawn the adult figure, something that suggested this child knew more about loss and love than any 8-year-old should have to know. Your mother, he said carefully. Did she ever mention anyone specific from Canyon's Edge? Luna looked up from her drawer repair, studying Ben's face with that too adult perception of hers. She talked about a boy who showed her how to make animal calls. Said he was the only person who never made fun of her for being too quiet. The memory hit Ben like a physical blow. Sarah, at 14, sitting on the rocks by Miller Creek, practicing the morning dove call he'd taught her until she could fool even the birds themselves. Sarah, who'd understood that sometimes the world was too loud, and the only refuge was the company of someone who didn't need words to communicate. Ben. Luna's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." In a way, he had. The ghost of the boy he'd been before tragedy taught him that loving people meant risking their loss. The ghost of possibilities that had been interrupted by time and distance and the cruel randomness of life. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice sounded rough even to his own ears. "Just, your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was," Stella said simply. "She always said that family wasn't just about blood relations, that the people who chose to love you were just as important as the ones who had to. Chosen family." The concept had seemed foreign to Ben for so long, but looking at Luna and Stella, at the fierce way they protected each other, at the easy way they'd included Rusty in their small pack, at how they'd begun to trust him, despite every reason to remain guarded, he was beginning to understand what Sarah had meant. Over the following days, Ben found himself studying the girls for traces of their mother. Luna had Sarah's quiet determination, that quality of watching and assessing before acting. Stella had inherited something else, Sarah's ability to find beauty in small things, to create something meaningful from whatever materials were at hand. The workshop was transformed by their presence. What had been a cluttered storage space became a cozy refuge. Stella's drawings were tacked to the walls, adding color and life to the functional space. Luna had installed hooks for their few possessions and arranged the furniture to create distinct areas for sleeping, eating, and the wood-carving lessons that had become an evening ritual. Ben taught them the basics, how to choose the right wood, how to let the grain guide your cuts, how to see the shape hiding inside the raw material, waiting to be revealed. Luna approached carving like she approached everything else, with careful precision and practical goals. Her first project was a simple bowl, perfectly proportioned and smoothly finished. Stella's approach was more intuitive, more artistic. She carved animals, horses and dogs and birds, that seemed to capture some essential quality of movement even in their stillness. Her latest project was a family of bears, each one slightly different but clearly belonging together. "They're like us," she explained one evening, as Ben helped her refine the smallest bear cub. Different sizes, but all looking out for each other. Ben found himself included in that definition of us without any formal discussion or declaration. It had simply happened, the way families sometimes formed around need and affection rather than birth certificates and legal documents. The workshop now had clean windows that let in morning light, organized storage that made everything easy to find, and the lingering scent of wood shavings and the vegetable soup Ben had taught them to make on the small camp stove. It had become a home in the truest sense, not just shelter, but a place where people cared about each other's daily happiness and safety. "You know," Luna said one evening, as they sat around the small table sharing dinner, "Mama used to say that home wasn't a place you found. It was a place you made with people who mattered." Ben looked around the transformed workshop, at the two children who'd somehow become part of his daily reality, at Rusty, who'd appointed himself family guardian, and realized that Sarah's daughter had inherited. More than her mother's practical skills and quiet wisdom, she'd inherited her understanding of what it meant to build a family, from love rather than circumstance. And she'd somehow managed to include a lonely mountain man in that construction project for the first time in 15 years. Ben was beginning to feel like he might be home. The knock on Ben's cabin door came at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, sharp and official. Ben opened it to find Sheriff Reynolds standing on his porch, hat in hand, and an uncomfortable expression on his weathered face. "Morning, Ben. Mind if I come in? Got something we need to discuss." Ben stepped aside, his stomach already knotting with the certainty that this visit had something to do with Luna and Stella. He'd been researching guardianship laws for weeks, spending hours at the small library in town reading legal documents that might as well have been written in a foreign language. "Coffee?" Ben offered, though his hands weren't entirely steady as he reached for the pot. "Thanks." Reynolds settled his bulk into one of Ben's kitchen chairs, which creaked in protest. "Ben, I got a call yesterday from a woman named Margaret Thornton down in Denver. Says she's looking for her nieces." The coffee cup slipped from Ben's fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. The crash brought Rusty running from the workshop, where he'd been keeping the girls company during their morning lessons. "Easy, boy," Reynolds said, holding out a hand to the agitated dog. "Nobody's in trouble here. Just need to have a conversation." But Ben knew better. In his experience, when officials showed up asking about missing children, somebody was definitely in trouble. The question was who. "What did you tell her?" Ben asked, kneeling to clean up the broken ceramic. "Told her I'd look into it. Canyon's Edge isn't that big. If there were children here, I'd know about it." Reynolds paused meaningfully. "Course, lately I've been hearing stories about you taking on some help around your place. Workshop renovations and such." Ben met the sheriff's eyes. Reynolds had been keeping the peace in this town for 30 years. He wasn't a man easily fooled or manipulated, but he was also fair. And he'd known Ben long enough to understand that this situation was more complicated than paperwork and legal obligations. "They're good kids," Ben said quietly. "I'm sure they are. Question is, are they the kids Margaret Thornton is looking for?" Before Ben could answer, the workshop door opened and Luna appeared, taking in the scene with sharp eyes that missed nothing. The broken coffee cup, Ben's pale face, the sheriff's uncomfortable posture, she read it all in an instant. "Stella." "Stay inside," she called over her shoulder, then stepped fully into the cabin and closed the door behind her. At 9 years old, she moved with the protective instincts of someone much older. "You must be Luna," Reynolds said gently. "I'm Sheriff Reynolds." Luna's jaw set in that familiar line of defiance. "Are you here to take us away?" The directness of the question seemed to catch Reynolds off guard. He glanced at Ben, then back to the child who stood like a sentinel between him and whatever threat she perceived. "I'm here to make sure you're safe," he said. "That's my job. We are safe," Luna said firmly. "Ben takes good care of us. I'm sure he does. But there's a woman in Denver who's been looking for you and your sister. She says she's family." Something shifted in Luna's expression, fear, but also something deeper and more complex. Resignation, perhaps, or the bitter knowledge that adults rarely kept their promises to children. "Aunt Margaret," she said, the name falling from her lips like something distasteful. "That's right. She's worried about you girls." Luna's laugh was harsh and entirely too adult. "She's worried about the Social Security money she gets for taking care of us. That's what she's worried about." Reynolds exchanged another look with Ben, who was carefully reconstructing the narrative he'd been building over the past weeks. The legal documents he'd been reading, the careful questions he'd asked Doc Martinez about child welfare, the growing certainty that these girls needed protection rather than rescue. "Luna," Ben said quietly, "why don't you tell Sheriff Reynolds what happened at your aunt's house?" Luna's defenses went up immediately. "We already told you. She said we were too much trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Reynolds asked, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone who'd interviewed frightened children before. Luna looked at Ben, some silent communication passing between them. He nodded encouragingly. "She locked us in our room at night," Luna said finally. "Said we were too loud, that we bothered the neighbors. She threw away Stella's drawings, said they were just clutter. And she—" Luna stopped, glancing toward the workshop where her sister waited. "Take your time," Reynolds said. "She had men over. Different ones. They drink and get loud, and sometimes they'd try to come into our room. Aunt Margaret said it was none of our business what she did, that we should be grateful she took us in at all." Ben felt that familiar cold fury rising in his chest. the same protective anger he'd once felt when finding evidence of poaching or animal abuse during his ranger days. But this was worse. This was children being failed by the very system designed to protect them. "How long did you stay there?" Reynolds asked. 3 months, until the night one of her friends tried to get into bed with Stella while she was sleeping. That's when we left." Reynolds was quiet for a long moment, making notes in the small pad he always carried. "And you've been on your own since then?" "We've been taking care of each other," Luna corrected, "until Ben started helping us." "How long has that been?" Luna looked at Ben again. 3 weeks, 4? Time's different when you're not just trying to survive. Reynolds closed his notebook and studied the two. Adults in the room, the child who'd been forced to grow up too. Fast, and the man who'd been learning how to care. "Again, Ben," he said finally, "you know I have to report this. That woman filed a missing persons case. Legally, these girls are still her responsibility." "Legally," Ben said, his voice harder than it had been in years. "What happens to children when the people responsible for them fail to protect them?" "Child Protective Services gets involved. Foster care, most likely, until suitable relatives can be found. And if there are no suitable relatives." Reynolds was quiet for a moment. "Then we find them a good home, with people who love them and keep them safe." Ben pulled out a folder he'd been keeping on the kitchen counter, the research he'd been doing, the legal documents he'd been studying, the careful notes he'd made about guardianship procedures. "What if they've already found that home?" he asked. Reynolds opened the folder, scanning the contents. Guardianship petition forms, character references from Murphy and Doc Martinez, financial statements showing Ben could provide for 2 children, and a letter of intent that he'd written and rewritten a dozen times. "Ben," Reynolds said carefully, "are you saying you want to adopt these girls?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Luna's eyes widened, flicking between Ben and the sheriff, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. "I'm saying they belong here," Ben said. "With me, with each other. They're Sarah's daughters, Jim. Sarah Mitchell's girls." Reynolds' eyes widened in recognition. "Sarah Mitchell, the girl you used to... But that would make you... someone who knew their mother, someone who understands what she would have wanted for them." Ben looked at Luna, seeing Sarah's determination in her young face. "Someone who's already committed to keeping them safe." The workshop door opened again, and Stella peered out, Rusty at her side. "Luna, is everything okay?" Luna turned to her sister, and for a moment her adult mask slipped, revealing the frightened child underneath. "I think maybe it's going to be..." Reynolds looked around the room, at the legal documents Ben had prepared, at Luna's protective stance, at Stella's hopeful face, at the golden dog who'd somehow become part of this unlikely family. "This is complicated," he said finally. "Margaret Thornton has legal custody. You'd have to challenge that in court, prove she's unfit. It could take months, and there's no guarantee." "Then we start now," Ben interrupted. "Today, whatever it takes." Reynolds studied Ben's face for a long moment, seeing something there that hadn't been present in 15 years. Purpose, determination, the kind of fierce protectiveness that turned ordinary people into fighters. "All right," he said, closing the folder. "But we do this right, by the book every step of the way. These girls deserve better than to be caught in the middle of a legal mess." Ben nodded, understanding that the sheriff was offering more than professional cooperation. He was offering his support. "One more thing," Reynolds added, looking directly at Luna. "In all of this, what you girls want matters too. The court will consider your preferences, especially at your age." Luna straightened, her small hand finding Stella's. "We want to stay with Ben. This is our home now." The words hit Ben with unexpected force. Our home. After 15 years of living like a ghost in his own life, he'd somehow become someone's home. The family photograph sat on Ben's kitchen table like a bridge between worlds, past and present, loss and hope, what was and what might be. He'd finally retrieved it from the drawer where it had lived for 15 years. Wrapped in tissue paper and hidden from view like something too painful to acknowledge, Luna and Stella studied the image with the intensity of archaeologists examining an artifact. 3 faces smiled back at them, Ben, younger and unburdened by grief, A woman with dark hair and kind eyes. And a little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed grin. That's your family, Luna said. It wasn't a question, Ben said quietly. My wife Sarah and our daughter Emily. Stella looked up from the photograph, her young face serious. The same Sarah as our mama? Ben nodded. We grew up together. Best friends until her family moved away when we were 16. Did you know she named us after stars? Stella asked. Luna means moon, and Stella means star. She said we were her celestial twins, born to light up dark places. The description was so perfectly Sarah, finding beauty and meaning in everything, turning even the most ordinary moments into something magical. Ben felt the familiar ache of loss, but underneath it, something new. Gratitude that her daughters carried forward her capacity for wonder. She always did see things differently than other people, Ben said. Made the world seem more beautiful just by the way she looked at it. Luna traced the edge of the photograph with careful fingers. What happened to them? Ben had been dreading this question, but he realized these girls deserved honesty. They'd faced their own devastating loss. They would understand his in ways that adults often couldn't. Flash flood, he said simply. We were camping in what should have been a safe canyon. Weather turned bad fast, faster than I thought possible. I tried to get to them, but his voice caught. I couldn't reach them in time. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that comes when people who've experienced profound loss recognize that silence in someone else. Rusty, sensing the emotional weight of the moment, came over and laid his head on Ben's knee. You blame yourself, Luna said. It wasn't a question, wouldn't you? Luna considered this with the same seriousness she brought to everything else. Mama used to say that blaming yourself for things you couldn't control was just another kind of prison. Said the people we love wouldn't want us to live in prison. The wisdom of a mother trying to prepare her children for a world where loss was inevitable, but love was still worth the risk. Ben wondered if Sarah had known, somehow, that her daughters would need those lessons sooner than any child should. Is that why you live alone out here? Stella asked. Because you're in prison? The question was asked with such innocent directness that Ben almost smiled despite the heaviness of the conversation. Maybe it was for a while. But prisons can have visitors, apparently. Sometimes they even get new permanent residents. Stella beamed at this, understanding intuitively that she and Luna were the residents in question. But Luna was studying Ben's face with that penetrating look of hers, seeing something the adults in her life had often missed. You're scared, she said. Terrified, Ben admitted. What if something happens to you two? What if I can't protect you the way I couldn't protect them? What if nothing happens? Luna countered. What if we all just get to be a family and be happy and nothing bad ever happens again? That's not how life works, Luna. Bad things happen to good people all the time. Good things happen too, Stella said firmly. Like us finding you, like Rusty finding us. Like Mama teaching us everything we needed to know to survive until we could find someone who wanted to keep us. Ben looked at these two remarkable children, one pragmatic and protective, the other artistic and optimistic, and realized they were teaching him something profound about resilience. They hadn't let their loss make them afraid to love again. They'd simply adapted, survived, and remained open to the possibility of new family, new happiness, new hope. The legal stuff is going to be complicated, he said, changing the subject to safer ground. How complicated? Luna asked. Ben spread the papers Reynolds had left with him across the table. Your aunt has legal custody. To change that, we have to prove she's unfit and that living with me is in your best interests. There will be hearings, investigations, probably months of uncertainty. Will they make us go back to her while all that's happening? The fear in Luna's voice cut right through Ben's heart. Not if I can help it. Reynolds thinks we can get a temporary protective order based on what you told him. Emergency custody until the court can make a permanent decision. And if we don't get it? Ben met her eyes, seeing Sarah's determination reflected there. Then we fight harder. Whatever it takes, Luna nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. Good, because we're not going back there, ever. What if the judge decides against us? Stella asked quietly. What if they say blood family is more important than chosen family? It was the question Ben had been avoiding, the possibility that kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling and planning contingencies he hoped he'd never need. Then we'll figure something out, he said. But Stella, I want you to understand something important. Even if the worst happens, even if some judge decides you have to live somewhere else, that doesn't mean you stop being family. You'll always have a place here. Always. Stella launched herself at Ben, wrapping her small arms around his waist with the fierce affection of a child who'd learned not to take love for granted. You'll always be our Ben, she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. No matter what some judge says. Luna maintained her composure, but Ben could see the emotion in her eyes. We should start preparing our case, she said. Character witnesses, evidence, all of that. Ben was continually amazed by this child's practical wisdom. Doc Martinez and Murphy have already agreed to write letters. Reynolds too, unofficially. And there's something else. I found your mother's address book in the things you brought from your aunt's house. There might be other people who knew her, who could testify about what she would have wanted for you. Really? Stella pulled back from the hug, her face lighting up. Maybe some of her friends from work. She was always talking about people she cared about. We'll find them, Ben promised. Everyone who knew Sarah Mitchell and would want to help her daughters. As they sat around the table planning their legal strategy, Ben realized something had shifted in his relationship with risk and love. The fear was still there. The terror of losing people he cared about would probably never completely disappear. But alongside it was something stronger. The fierce determination to protect this family he'd never intended to build. Looking at the photograph of his first family and then at the two girls who'd become his second chance at fatherhood, Ben understood what Sarah, both of them, had been trying to teach him. Love wasn't about guarantees or safety nets. It was about showing up every day, ready to fight for the people who mattered, even when the outcome was uncertain, especially when the outcome was uncertain. All right, he said, gathering up the legal documents. Let's build a case they can't ignore. The letter was hidden in the lining of Stella's pink blanket, discovered by accident when Luna was attempting to repair a tear in the faded fabric. The paper was folded small, protected by a plastic sandwich bag, and sewn into the blanket's corner with careful, nearly invisible stitches. Luna's hands trembled as she worked to free the letter from its hiding place. Stella and Ben watching with growing curiosity. When she finally extracted the document and unfolded it, they could see immediately that it was their mother's handwriting, the same careful script that had labeled their school supplies and written encouraging notes in their lunchboxes. What does it say? Stella whispered, leaning closer to her sister. Luna's eyes moved across the lines, her expression shifting from confusion to wonder to something approaching awe. It's about us, about what would happen if something happened to her. Ben felt his heart rate accelerate, but he forced himself to remain calm. Maybe you should read it out loud. Luna cleared her throat and began. My dearest Luna and Stella, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me and your father, and I pray you're somewhere safe with people who love you. I'm hiding this letter in your blanket, Stella, because I know you'll never let go of it, and Luna, because I know you'll eventually try to fix anything that's broken. I need you both to know that I made provisions for your care that extend beyond legal documents and court orders. Margaret is your aunt, and the law says she has the right to take care of you if something happens to your parents. But law and love are different things, and I need you to understand the difference. Margaret contacted me twice after your father and I got married, both times asking for money. She struggled with addiction and poor choices for most of her adult life. And while I pray she's gotten her life together, I cannot in good conscience trust her with the most precious things in my world, my daughters. There's someone else, someone from my childhood who I know would love you and protect you the way you deserve. His name is Ben Harlow, and he lives in Canyon's Edge, the town where I grew up, where I learned that family isn't always about blood relations. Ben doesn't know about this letter. He doesn't even know you exist. because your father and I lost touch with most of our childhood friends when we moved away to build our life together. But if you can find him, if fate somehow brings you to Canyon's edge, I believe with all my heart that he will take care of you. I've included his last known address and some things you should know about him. Ben is quiet and gentle, someone who understands that the most important conversations happen without words. He taught me to see beauty in small things, the way light hits water, the sound of wind in pine trees, the satisfaction of fixing something with your own hands. He's probably hurt right now. When I knew him, he'd just lost his parents in an accident, and the grief made him want to help everyone else before himself. He has a good heart that's probably been wounded by life, the way good hearts often are. But if you can find him, if you can show him that you need him, I believe he'll remember what I tried to teach him all those years ago, that love is always worth the risk, even when it means opening yourself up to loss. Luna, you have my strength and determination. Stella, you have my ability to find light in dark places. Together, you have everything you need to build a family with someone who deserves your love. If Ben can't take you, or if you can't find him, know that there are other good people in Canyon's Edge. Look for Murphy at the general store, or Doc Martinez at the clinic. Tell them you're Sarah Mitchell's daughters, and they'll help you, but try to find Ben first. He needs you as much as you need him, even if he doesn't know it yet. I love you both more than all the stars in the sky. Take care of each other, trust your instincts, and remember that home is wherever people love you unconditionally. Forever your mother, Sarah Mitchell, PDS. I've left a small inheritance with a lawyer named James Patterson in Denver. The legal documents are in the safety deposit box at First National Bank. The key is taped under your jewelry box, Luna. This money is for your future, not for anyone else to use. Don't let Margaret know about it. The silence that followed the reading was profound. Ben sat frozen, his mind reeling with implications that reframed everything he thought he understood about coincidence and fate. Sarah had known. Somehow, despite all the years and distance between them, she'd known he would be the right person to care for her daughters. She planned this, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Your mother. She actually planned for you to find me. Stella was crying, but they were tears of wonder rather than sadness. She knew we'd need you. Even before anything bad happened, she knew. Luna was studying Ben's face with that penetrating look of hers. This changes things, doesn't it? For the court case? Ben nodded slowly, the legal implications beginning to penetrate his shock. A mother's written wishes, especially when they detail specific concerns about the legal guardian's fitness. This could change everything. What about the money she mentioned? Luna asked pragmatically. We'll look into it, but that's secondary to the custody issue. Ben looked at both girls, seeing them with new eyes. They weren't just two children he'd stumbled across and grown to love. They were Sarah's daughters, entrusted to his care by someone who'd known him well enough to believe he'd rise to the occasion. Did she really know you that well? Stella asked. To know you'd take care of us? Ben thought back to his friendship with Sarah, remembering the quiet understanding they'd shared, the way she'd seemed to see past his awkward teenage exterior to something steadier underneath. Your mother understood people in ways that seemed almost magical, he said. She could see who someone really was, not just who they appeared to be. And she saw someone who would be a good father, Luna said firmly. The word hung in the air between them. Father. Not guardian, not caretaker, but father. It was a role Ben had never expected to fill again, a responsibility that terrified and honored him in equal measure. The question is, he said carefully, what do we do with this letter? We use it, Luna said immediately. We show it to the lawyers and the judge, and anyone else who needs to understand why we belong with you. Ben nodded, already thinking through the legal strategy. This letter proves your mother's wishes were different from what the law assumed. It documents her concerns about Margaret's fitness as a guardian. Most importantly, it shows that your living with me isn't some random accident. It's exactly what your mother hoped would happen. Will it be enough? Stella asked. I think it might be. Combined with everything else, your testimony, the character witnesses, Margaret's history, this letter could tip the scales in our favor. Luna carefully folded the letter and handed it to Ben. Keep it safe. It's the most important thing we have. As Ben took the document, he felt the weight of Sarah's trust across the years. She'd believed he would do right by her daughters, had literally hidden her faith in him within the security blanket she'd given to comfort them. There's something else, he said, looking at both girls. This letter means your mother was thinking about me, planning for your care right up until the end. That tells me something important. What? Stella asked. It tells me that some part of our old friendship survived all these years. That despite everything that happened, despite all the time and distance, she still believed I was someone worth trusting with what mattered most to her. The emotional weight of this realization was staggering. For 15 years, Ben had lived with the belief that he was fundamentally unworthy of other people's trust, that his failure to save his own family disqualified him from protecting anyone else. But Sarah's letter offered a different perspective, that of someone who'd known him at his core and believed in his capacity for love and protection. She was right to trust you, Luna said simply. Look how well you've taken care of us. Ben looked around the workshop that had become their home, at the evidence of the life they'd built together. Stella's drawings on the walls, Luna's organized storage systems, Rusty sleeping peacefully in his favorite spot by the wood stove. Somehow, without planning or intention, they'd become exactly what Sarah had envisioned, a family built on love rather than legal obligation. We should call the lawyer tomorrow, Ben said. Get this letter into the official record as soon as possible. And then, Stella asked, and then we wait for Margaret to make her next move. But whatever happens, she's going to have to contend with your mother's wishes. Clearly documented and legally relevant. As they prepared for bed that night, Ben reflected on the strange circularity of life. Sarah had been his dearest friend, lost to distance and time. Now her daughters had found their way to him, carrying with them not just their mother's love, but her explicit trust in his ability to be the father they needed. It was either the most remarkable coincidence in the history of human experience, or it was something else entirely, the kind of grace that arrives disguised as accident but reveals itself, in time, to be exactly what everyone involved needed most. Either way, Ben was grateful beyond words for the letter hidden in a little girl's blanket, and for the woman who'd loved her daughters enough to plan for their happiness, even in her darkest fears about the future. Ben's old ranger badge sat on the bathroom counter, its bronze surface tarnished, but still bearing the words National Park Service in clear letters. He hadn't worn it in 15 years, hadn't even looked at it for the past 5. But this morning, as he prepared for the custody hearing that would determine Luna and Stella's future, he found himself reaching for it like a talisman. The badge represented a time when he'd believed in his ability to protect and serve, when his judgment had been trusted with the safety of countless visitors to the wilderness preserve. Maybe it was superstition, but pinning it to his jacket felt like reclaiming something essential about himself, the part that knew how to fight for people who needed protection. In the kitchen, Luna sat at the table writing notes on index cards. She'd insisted on preparing talking points for the hearing, approaching the legal battle with the same methodical precision she brought to organizing tools or planning their weekly grocery trips. Remember, she said, not looking up from her work, we need to emphasize that this isn't about what's easiest for the adults. It's about what's best for us. Ben marveled at this child's tactical wisdom. At 9 years old, she understood legal strategy better than many adults he'd known. What else? He asked, pouring coffee into his thermos. Margaret's going to try to make this about money. She'll say she can provide better financially, bigger house, more opportunities. Luna looked up from her cards. But we need the judge to understand that security isn't just about money. Stella emerged from the workshop, her hair neatly braided and her best dress, purchased specially for the hearing, carefully pressed. She carried a folder containing drawings she'd made over the past month, pictures of their daily life, their small family, the home they'd built together. "Are you ready?" Ben asked her. Stella nodded, though her eyes showed the nervous energy of someone facing an uncertain future. "I drew one more picture last night," she said, opening her folder to reveal a new drawing. It showed 4 figures, Ben, Luna, herself, and Rusty, standing in front of a house with mountains in the background. Above them, she'd drawn a woman with wings, watching over the family below. "That's Mama," she explained. "I wanted the judge to see that she's still taking care of us even now." The simple faith in that statement hit Ben like a physical blow. This child had been through trauma that would have broken many adults, yet she still believed in protection, in love that transcended physical presence. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. They drove to the courthouse in Ben's pickup truck, the cab filled with the kind of tense silence that comes before important battles. Luna sat between Ben and Stella, her small hands clutched around the folder containing their mother's letter and other crucial documents. The lawyer, James Patterson, the same attorney Sarah had mentioned in her letter, met them at the courthouse steps. He was younger than Ben had expected, but his reputation for family law was solid, and more importantly, he'd known Sarah professionally when she'd updated her will after the twins were born. "How are we looking?" Ben asked as they climbed the courthouse steps. "Better than I hoped," Patterson replied. "Margaret's attorney filed some last-minute motions, questioning your fitness as a guardian, but the mother's letter changes everything. It establishes clear intent and documents specific concerns about the current guardian's suitability." They paused outside the courtroom doors, which seemed imposing enough to house the Supreme Court, rather than a county family court. "What should we expect from Margaret?" Ben asked. Patterson's expression grew serious. "She'll be aggressive. Her attorney will argue that blood relations should take precedence, that the girls need a traditional family structure, that you're an aging bachelor with no experience raising children." Luna looked up at Ben with fierce loyalty. "But none of that's true. You're the best father we could ask for." The word father still took Ben by surprise, even after weeks of hearing it. But each time one of the girls used it, it felt more natural, more right. "Remember," Patterson continued, "this is about the best interests of the children. The judge will consider their wishes, especially at their age. But ultimately, the decision comes down to who can provide the most stable, loving environment." Through the courthouse windows, Ben could see Margaret Thornton pacing in the lobby with her attorney. She was younger than he'd expected, probably mid-30s, well-dressed in a way that spoke of financial stability. But something about her movements, sharp, agitated, focused on her phone rather than the gravity of the situation, confirmed Ben's instincts about her motivations. "She looks nervous," Stella observed. "Good," Luna said with satisfaction. "She should be." Doc Martinez appeared in the lobby, wearing his best suit and carrying a briefcase that looked older than Ben's truck. Behind him came Murphy O'Brien, his usually rumpled clothes pressed and his silver hair neatly combed. Sheriff Reynolds brought up the rear, his uniform crisp and his expression serious. "Your character witnesses," Patterson noted with approval. "The judge will give significant weight to their testimony, especially coming from long-time community members." Ben felt a surge of gratitude for these men who'd known him during his darkest years and were now willing to vouch for the man he'd become. They'd watched his transformation from broken widower to devoted father, had seen him rediscover his capacity for love and protection. "5 more minutes, Patterson said, checking his watch. "Any last questions?" Luna raised her hand like she was in school. "Will we have to talk to the judge?" "Probably, but not in open court. The judge will likely want to speak with you privately, in chambers. He'll ask about your preferences, how you feel living with Ben versus living with your aunt." "That's easy," Stella said firmly. "We want to stay with Ben. This is our home." "I know, sweetheart. But the judge needs to hear it from you in your own words." "Can you do that?" Both girls nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of what was being asked of them. As they entered the courtroom, Ben caught sight of Margaret for the first time up close. She was attractive in a sharp-edged way, but her eyes held the calculating look of someone who viewed the girls as assets rather than children. When she saw Luna and Stella, her smile was performative, lacking genuine warmth. "Girls!" she called out, her voice carrying false cheer. "How wonderful to see you. I've been so worried." Luna's response was polite but cool. "Hello, Aunt Margaret." Stella said nothing, moving closer to Ben's side. Margaret's eyes narrowed as she took in this protective dynamic, then shifted to Ben with undisguised hostility. "So you're the man who's been hiding my nieces from me?" "I'm the man who's been taking care of them," Ben replied evenly. "We'll see what the judge thinks about that," Margaret said, her mask slipping enough to reveal the anger underneath. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Harrison entered, a man in his 60s with grey hair and kind eyes that suggested both wisdom and fairness. Ben felt a cautious optimism as he watched the judge review the case files. "This is a custody hearing regarding Luna and Stella Mitchell," Judge Harrison announced. "I've reviewed the filings from both parties, and I must say this is one of the most unusual cases I've encountered." He looked directly at the girls, his expression softening. "Ladies, I want you to know that this court's primary concern is your welfare and happiness. We're here to determine what arrangement will best serve your interests." Luna sat straighter, meeting the judge's eyes with remarkable composure for a 9-year-old. "Before we begin testimony," Judge Harrison continued, "I'd like to address the letter that was submitted as evidence, a document allegedly written by your mother expressing her wishes regarding your care." Patterson stood. "Your Honor, we're prepared to authenticate that document through handwriting analysis and witness testimony from people who knew the deceased. We'll get to that. But first, I want to understand how this letter came to light after the initial custody arrangement was made." Ben felt his heart rate accelerate. This was the crucial moment, when their case would either gain credibility or fall apart under scrutiny. Luna raised her hand politely. "Your Honor, may I explain?" Judge Harrison looked surprised, but nodded. "Please do. Mama hid the letter in my sister's blanket before she died. We didn't find it until a few weeks ago when the blanket got torn. She sewed it in there because she knew Stella would never let go of that blanket, and she knew I would try to fix it when it got damaged." The simple honesty of the explanation seemed to resonate with the judge. "And you're certain this letter is in your mother's handwriting?" "Yes, sir. She wrote us notes every day for school lunches." "We know her writing very well." Judge Harrison nodded thoughtfully, then looked at Margaret's attorney. "Counselor, does your client dispute the authenticity of this document?" Margaret's lawyer whispered urgently with his client before responding. "Your Honor, even if the letter is authentic, it has no legal standing. My client was awarded custody through proper legal channels." "Perhaps," Judge Harrison said. "But a parent's clearly expressed wishes regarding their children's welfare are always relevant to this court. We'll proceed with testimony, and then I'll make my determination." As the formal proceedings began, Ben felt the weight of his ranger badge against his chest, a reminder of who he'd been and who he was becoming. The battle for Luna and Stella's future was about to begin, and he was as ready as he'd ever be. Margaret's attorney opened with a predictable strategy, emphasizing blood relations, financial stability, and traditional family structures. Margaret herself took the stand first, presenting herself as the concerned aunt who'd been searching tirelessly for her missing nieces. "I was devastated when the girls disappeared," she testified, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I've been providing them with a stable home, proper schooling, everything children need, but under cross-examination, Patterson was relentless." "Mrs. Thornton, can you explain why the girls felt the need to run away from your care?" "Children sometimes have difficulty adjusting to new situations," Margaret replied stiffly. "They were grieving their parents. Is it true that you locked them in their room at night?" Margaret's composure cracked slightly. "They needed structure, boundaries, and the men who visited your home, the ones who made the girls uncomfortable. I have a right to a social life. The children were never in any danger. Patterson produced bank records showing Margaret's financial struggles, documentation of her past issues with substances, and testimonies from neighbors about the chaotic environment in her home. By the time Margaret stepped down from the witness stand, her image as a caring guardian had been thoroughly dismantled. Ben watched the judge's expression throughout her testimony, noting the increasing skepticism in his eyes. Then it was Ben's turn to present his case. Doc Martinez spoke first, describing Ben's character and his transformation since the girls had come into his life. "Your Honor," the elderly doctor said, "I've known Ben Harlow for 20 years. I delivered his daughter, and I watched him struggle after losing his family. These past months, watching him with Luna and Stella, I've seen him become the man he was always meant to be, a devoted, protective, loving father." Murphy O'Brien followed, testifying about Ben's integrity and the way the community had rallied around the unconventional family. Sheriff Reynolds spoke about Ben's trustworthiness and the girls' obvious happiness and security in his care. The most powerful testimony came from James Patterson himself, who had known Sarah professionally and could authenticate the letter. "Your Honor, I helped Sarah Mitchell draft her will when the twins were born. She was meticulous about their care, deeply concerned about their welfare. The letter we've submitted is consistent with conversations I had with her about guardianship provisions. She specifically mentioned her childhood friend Ben Harlow as someone she would trust with her daughters' lives." Judge Harrison listened carefully to each witness, asking pointed questions and taking detailed notes. When the testimony phase concluded, he announced that he wanted to speak with Luna and Stella privately in his chambers. As the girls disappeared with the judge and court reporter, Ben felt the full weight of uncertainty. Everything they'd built together, everything they'd come to mean to each other, now rested in the hands of a man they'd just met. Patterson placed a reassuring hand on Ben's shoulder. "You've done everything possible. The case is solid, the girls are clearly happy and healthy, and that letter from their mother is devastating to Margaret's position." 20 minutes felt like 20 hours before Judge Harrison returned with the girls. Luna and Stella took their seats beside Ben, and he noticed that both looked calm, almost serene. "This court will recess for 30 minutes while I review all testimony and evidence," Judge Harrison announced. "We'll reconvene for my decision." In the courthouse hallway, Ben tried to read the judge's expression for clues, but found nothing. Luna seemed remarkably composed for someone whose future hung in the balance. "What did he ask you?" Ben inquired quietly. "About our daily life with you," Luna replied. "About school and chores and whether we felt safe and loved. What did you tell him?" Stella smiled for the first time all day. "We told him the truth, that you're the best father we could ask for, and that Mama would be proud of the family we've all built together." When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Harrison's expression remained unreadable as he prepared to deliver his verdict. Ben's hands were steady as he stood to hear the decision that would determine whether the family they'd created would be allowed to continue. The moment of truth had arrived. Judge Harrison's chambers were warm and welcoming, nothing like the formal courtroom. Luna and Stella sat in comfortable chairs facing the judge's desk, while a court reporter quietly documented their conversation. The judge had removed his robe, appearing more like a kind grandfather than an intimidating authority figure. "Girls," he began gently, "I want you to know that what we discuss here is very important. I need to understand how you feel about your living situation, both past and present." Luna straightened in her chair, her adult composure intact even in this crucial moment. "Your Honor, we want to stay with Ben. He's our family now. Tell me about your life before you came to live with Mr. Harlow," Judge Harrison said. "Starting with your time at your aunt's house." Luna glanced at Stella, who nodded encouragingly. They'd prepared for this conversation, understanding that their words could determine their future. "Aunt Margaret was supposed to take care of us after Mama and Daddy died," Luna began carefully. "But she wasn't really interested in being our guardian. She was more interested in the money that came with us." "What makes you say that?" "She talked about it on the phone with her friends. How much the state paid for our care, how she could use the money for other things." She said we were expensive but worth it because of the payments. Judge Harrison made notes, his expression growing more serious. What was daily life like in her home?
Stella found her voice.
We weren't allowed to make noise during the day because she slept late. We had to stay in our room from 8 o'clock at night until 8 in the morning, even if we weren't tired or had to use the bathroom. She locked the door, Luna added, from the outside. Said it was for our own good, but... She paused, looking at her sister. But what, Luna? But it felt like prison, and sometimes her friends would try to come into our room at night. That's why we left. Judge Harrison set down his pen and leaned forward. That must have been very frightening. It was, Stella said quietly. But we had each other, and we're brave when we're together. Tell me about meeting Mr. Harlow. Luna's entire demeanor changed, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. He was feeding stray animals behind Murphy's store. We were hungry, and we shared the food he left with a dog we'd found. When Ben saw us, he didn't get angry or call the police. He helped us. How did he help you? He gave us money for real food, Stella said. But he called it payment for taking care of the strays, so we didn't have to feel bad about accepting it. That sounds thoughtful. Ben understands things, Luna explained. He knows what it's like to lose people you love, so he understands why we were scared to trust anyone. He never pushed us or made us do anything we weren't ready for. Judge Harrison consulted his notes. You've been living with him for several weeks now. What is that like? It's like having a real family again, Stella said simply. Ben teaches us things, like how to carve wood and track animals. He makes sure we eat healthy food and helps us with homework. But mostly he loves us. How do you know he loves you? Because he worries about us the way parents worry, Luna said. He checks on us at night when we have bad dreams. He remembers things that are important to us, and he's fighting to keep us, even though it would be easier for him to let us go. What about your aunt? She says she loves you too. Luna's expression hardened slightly. Aunt Margaret loves what we represent, money and the appearance of doing the right thing. But she doesn't love us. She doesn't even know us. How can you tell the difference? Stella leaned forward earnestly. When you love someone, you want them to be happy. Ben wants us to be happy. Aunt Margaret wants us to be quiet and convenient. If I were to award custody to your aunt, how would you feel? Scared, Luna said without hesitation. And sad. We've already lost our parents. Why should we have to lose another family that actually wants us? We'd run away again, Stella added matter-of-factly. We know how to survive on our own, but we don't want to have to. Judge Harrison studied both girls carefully. You seem very mature for your ages. We had to grow up fast when Mama and Daddy died, Luna said. But Ben lets us be kids again sometimes. He doesn't expect us to take care of everything by ourselves. One last question, and I want you both to think carefully before answering. If you could design the perfect living situation, what would it look like? Luna and Stella exchanged a look, that silent communication that had sustained them through their worst times. It would be exactly what we have now, Stella said. Ben and Luna and me and Rusty, living in our cabin and being a family, with maybe a bigger workshop so we could have proper bedrooms, Luna added practically. But otherwise, everything is perfect just the way it is. Judge Harrison closed his notepad and smiled at both girls. Thank you for being so honest with me. You're both very brave, and I can see that you care deeply about each other and about Mr. Harlow. As they prepared to return to the courtroom, Luna turned back to the judge. Your Honor, will you really listen to what we want? Yes, Luna. What children want matters very much to this court, especially children as thoughtful and articulate as you two. Walking back to the courtroom, both girls held their heads high, confident that they'd represented their feelings and their family with clarity and truth. Now all they could do was wait for Judge Harrison to decide their fate. Judge Harrison returned to the bench after what felt like the longest 30 minutes in Ben's life. The courtroom was silent, except for the soft whisper of papers and the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Margaret sat rigidly beside her attorney, while Ben found himself flanked by Luna and Stella, their small hands resting confidently in his. This case presents several complex legal and ethical considerations. Judge Harrison began. his voice carrying the weight of careful deliberation. "We have a legal guardian appointed through proper channels. Challenged by an arrangement that exists outside traditional custody frameworks, but appears to serve the children's best interests remarkably well." Ben felt his heart hammering against his ribs. But Luna's steady presence beside him provided an anchor of calm. "I've reviewed all testimony, examined the physical evidence, and most importantly, listened carefully to Luna and Stella's own voices regarding their preferences and experiences." The judge paused, consulting his notes with deliberate care. "Mrs. Thornton, while I don't doubt your legal right to custody, I have serious concerns about the environment you provided for these children. The testimony regarding locked doors, inappropriate supervision, and the circumstances that led to the girls' departure raises significant questions about your ability to meet their emotional and physical needs." Margaret's face flushed red, but her attorney placed a restraining hand on her arm before she could respond. "Mr. Harlow, your situation is highly irregular. You have no legal training for guardianship, no formal experience with child-rearing since your own daughter's death, and you've been caring for these children without proper legal authority." Ben's stomach dropped. But Judge Harrison wasn't finished. "However, the evidence presented tells a remarkable story of healing, love, and mutual care. Dr. Martinez's testimony about the girls' improved health and emotional well-being is compelling. Sheriff Reynolds' observations about their security and happiness carry significant weight. Most persuasively, the girls themselves speak with unmistakable clarity about where they feel safe, loved, and at home." The judge held up Sarah's letter, its pages catching the courtroom light. "This document, which I believe to be authentic based on handwriting analysis and testimonial evidence, represents something extraordinary, a mother's careful consideration of her children's welfare in circumstances she hoped would never occur." Sarah Mitchell knew both parties in this case. She had direct experience with Mrs. Thornton's care capabilities and expressed specific concerns about entrusting her daughters to that care. Margaret's composure finally cracked. "Your Honor, that letter has no legal standing. Mrs. Thornton, you will remain silent unless directly addressed by this court," Judge Harrison said firmly. "As I was saying, while this letter may not constitute a formal legal document, it represents the considered wishes of a loving mother who wanted the best possible future for her children." Ben felt Luna's hand tighten in his, and he squeezed back gently. "The law exists to serve the best interests of children, not to perpetuate arrangements that fail to meet their fundamental needs for safety, stability, and love. In this case, the law must bend to accommodate what is clearly a beneficial and loving family unit." Judge Harrison's gavel rested on his desk as he delivered his decision. "Therefore, this court hereby awards permanent custody of Luna and Stella Mitchell to Benjamin Harlow, with all rights and responsibilities of legal guardianship. Mrs. Thornton's custody is terminated effective immediately." The words hit Ben like a physical force. Permanent custody, legal guardianship. The girls were officially, legally, permanently his daughters. Stella let out a small gasp of joy, while Luna maintained her composure, but couldn't suppress the smile that transformed her entire face. Behind them, Ben could hear Doc Martinez and Murphy expressing quiet satisfaction, while Margaret's shocked protest was quickly silenced by her attorney. "Mr. Harlow," Judge Harrison continued, "this court will require you to complete parenting classes and undergo periodic reviews to ensure the continued welfare of these children. But based on everything I've observed today, I have great confidence in your ability to provide the love, stability, and guidance Luna and Stella need and deserve." Ben stood on unsteady legs, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you, Your Honor. I won't let them down." "You already haven't," the judge replied with a rare smile. "Girls, you're fortunate to have found each other." Luna stood as well, her adult composure finally giving way to childlike joy. "Does this mean we're really Ben's daughters now?" "Forever?" "Yes, Luna. Mr. Harlow is now your legal guardian with all the rights and responsibilities of parenthood. You're a family in the eyes of the law." Stella launched herself at Ben, wrapping her arms around his waist with fierce affection. "We did it," she whispered. "We're really family now." Luna joined the embrace more quietly, but no less fervently. "Forever family," she said, using a phrase she'd coined weeks earlier. As Margaret stormed out of the courtroom with her attorney, Ben held his daughters close and felt something settle into place in his chest, a sense of completion, of purpose fulfilled, of love finally given its proper legal recognition. The gavel came down with finality, and Judge Harrison's voice carried across the courtroom one last time. "Court is adjourned. Congratulations to the Harlow family, the Harlow family." Ben had never heard more beautiful words in his life. Outside the courthouse, as they were surrounded by well-wishers and supporters, Ben looked down at Luna and Stella, his daughters, now and forever, and realized that some battles are worth every risk, every fear, every moment of uncertainty. This was one of those battles, and they had won. 6 months after Judge Harrison's gavel had legally sealed their family, Ben stood in the doorway of the expanded workshop, now converted into proper bedrooms for Luna and Stella. The morning light streamed through new windows, illuminating the transformation that had taken place in every corner of their lives. Luna's side of the space was organized with military precision, books arranged by height, clothes folded and stored in labeled boxes. Her wood-carving tools maintained with the same care Ben had once reserved for his ranger equipment. Her latest project, an intricate jewelry box for Stella's birthday, sat nearly completed on her workbench. Stella's area looked like a celebration of childhood had exploded across it, drawings tacked to every available wall surface, art supplies scattered in creative chaos, and the family of carved bears she'd been working on arranged in a place of honor on her dresser. Her newest creation, a portrait of their family, including Rusty, showed remarkable improvement in technique and confidence. "Dad?" Luna's voice called from the kitchen. The words still caught Ben off guard sometimes, filling him with a pride and purpose he'd forgotten he was capable of feeling. "Breakfast is ready." Ben smiled at the commanding tone she used. Luna had appointed herself assistant household manager, ensuring everyone stayed fed, schedules were maintained, and important tasks weren't forgotten. She'd inherited her mother's practical wisdom, but added her own fierce protective instincts. In the kitchen, he found Stella sitting at the table with Rusty at her feet, both of them watching Luna serve up scrambled eggs and toast with the seriousness of a short-order cook. The golden retriever had gained 20 pounds of healthy weight and now sported a shiny coat that gleamed in the morning sun. "Good morning, family," Ben said, settling into his chair and accepting the coffee Luna poured with practiced efficiency. "Morning, Dad," both girls chorused, though Stella added a giggle that transformed the formal greeting into something warm and familial. Their mornings had developed their own rhythm over the months. Breakfast together, then the drive to Canyon's Edge Elementary, where both girls had not only caught up academically, but excelled beyond their grade levels. Luna had discovered a talent for mathematics that impressed her teachers, while Stella's artistic abilities had earned her recognition in several school competitions. "Mrs. Patterson wants to enter my drawing in the state fair," Stella announced between bites of toast. "The one of the mountain sunset." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Ben said, remembering the painting in question, a landscape that captured the golden light of evening on the canyon walls with startling maturity for an 8-year-old's work. "Will you help me frame it?" she asked. "Of course. We'll go to town this afternoon and pick out something special." Luna looked up from her meal-planning notebook. Yes, she kept a meal-planning notebook with practical concern. "Don't forget, we have our appointment with Dr. Martinez for our 6-month checkup." The court-mandated reviews had become routine, but Ben still felt a flutter of nervousness before each one. Not because he doubted their family's stability, but because losing Luna and Stella remained his greatest fear. Even with legal custody firmly established, "And Sheriff Reynolds wants to stop by later this week," Luna continued. "Something about Rusty needing to be registered as a therapy dog. That was news to Ben." "Therapy dog?" Stella grinned. We might have mentioned to him that Rusty helps kids at school who get scared or sad, and that he's really good at knowing when people need comfort. Ben looked down at the golden retriever, who gazed back with the patient wisdom of a creature who'd learned that loving meant staying close and being ready for whatever was needed. I suppose he is at that. After breakfast, Ben walked the girls to the school bus stop, a daily ritual they all cherished. Other parents had joined them over the months as word spread that the mountain man had become a devoted father, and Ben found himself part of a community he'd avoided for 15 years. "Ben!" Murphy O'Brien called from his store porch. "I got those supplies you ordered. Educational materials for the nature program?" Ben waved acknowledgement. He'd recently started working part-time with the Park Service again, developing educational programs for visiting school groups. Having Luna and Stella had reminded him of his love for teaching children about the natural world, and the work provided both income and purpose. As the school bus disappeared around the bend, Ben walked back to his cabin with Rusty trotting alongside. The dog had appointed himself guardian of the entire family, but he seemed to understand that Ben needed protection too, from the isolation that had nearly consumed him before 2 hungry children had wandered into his life. The new family portrait sat on the kitchen table, waiting to be hung. They'd had it taken the previous weekend, all 3 of them plus Rusty arranged in front of their expanded home. The photographer had captured something essential, not just their physical resemblance to a traditional family, but the deep contentment that came from people who'd found their place in the world. Ben picked up the photograph and studied the faces looking back at him. Luna, serious but smiling, her hand resting protectively on Stella's shoulder. Stella, grinning with unrestrained joy, her artistic soul evident in the way she'd arranged everyone for the best composition. And himself, looking happier and more at peace than he had in 15 years. On the back, in Stella's careful handwriting, she'd written, "The Harlow family, forever and always." Ben hung the portrait on the wall next to the old photograph of his first family, understanding now that love didn't require forgetting the past. It required honoring it while remaining open to the future. Outside, the canyon walls caught the morning light just as they had for millions of years, but everything else had changed. The cabin that had once housed only solitude and grief now overflowed with laughter, homework negotiations, and the daily chaos of children learning to trust that home was a place they could count on. That evening, as Ben helped Luna and Stella with homework and listened to their plans for school projects and weekend adventures, he reflected on the circuitous path that had brought them together. Sarah's letter had spoken of fate and chance, but Ben now understood it was something simpler and more profound, the recognition that family was built not on shared DNA, but on shared commitment to love, protect and care for each other through whatever challenges life presented. Luna looked up from her math problems, catching him in his moment of reflection. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" Ben smiled, reaching over to ruffle her dark hair. "Just grateful, sweetheart. Just grateful for all of it, even the hard parts?" Stella asked from where she was working on a social studies report. "Especially the hard parts," Ben said, "because that's what made us strong enough to be a family." Outside, the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars Sarah had named her daughters after, the same stars that had watched over their journey from strangers to family. And in the warm glow of the kitchen lamp, 3 people and 1 golden dog continued building the life they'd all needed, without knowing it was possible. Sometimes the most beautiful